The scent of stale tea and the faint, metallic tang of old dust. Was this the aroma of a life well lived, or simply a life long endured? Li Meihua often pondered this as she moved through the two-bedroom apartment in Suzhou, a city that had shed its skin countless times while hers seemed only to thin and wrinkle. The morning sun, sliced by the anemic blinds, painted stripes across the worn linoleum of the kitchen floor. It was 7 a.m., time for Gao Wei's congee. Her husband, Gao Wei, a man whose retirement had transformed him from a moderately engaged civil servant into a connoisseur of silence and bonsai trees, was already seated at the small formica table, his newspaper a formidable shield. Meihua placed the bowl before him, the steam carrying the subtle fragrance of ginger and scallions. He grunted, a sound that could mean anything from thank you to the world is ending. 38 years of marriage had taught Meihua not to expect further elucidation. Her own breakfast was simpler, a mantou, a cup of yesterday's tea reheated. The apartment, meticulously clean yet imbued with a sense of immutable stillness, hummed with the white noise of the city outside, a distant chorus of horns, the rumble of construction, the murmur of 1,000 lives rushing past. Hers, it seemed, had settled into a predictable, shallow eddy. The phone shrilled, a jarring interruption to the morning's quietude. Gao Ming, their son. "Ma, you well?" His voice, ever buoyant, crackled through the receiver. "Listen, we're coming over this weekend. Xiao Bao is desperate to see his Nai. A familiar warmth spread through Meihua, quickly followed by an equally familiar wariness. "That's lovely, Ah Ming. What would you like me to cook?" "Oh, you know, your special Hong Shao roe, the one that takes all day. And maybe those crystal shrimp dumplings? And Ma, Ling Ling and I have that company dinner on Saturday, the really important one. Could you look after Xiao Bao for the whole weekend? It would be a lifesaver." Each request landed like a carefully placed stone, adding to a pile she'd been carrying for years. "Of course, Ming," she said, her voice smoother than her thoughts. "Nai will take good care of Xiao Bao." "You're the best, Ma," he chirped, and then, after a perfunctory inquiry about his father, he was gone. Meihua hung up, the silence of the apartment pressing in. She glanced towards a dusty cardboard box tucked away in the corner of the spare room, a room that was more storage than guest space. Inside, she knew, lay fragments of a different Li Meihua, a younger woman whose fingers had danced with ink and paper. Later that week, while turning out the spare room in preparation for her son's family, Meihua's hand hesitated over that box. With a sigh that seemed to carry the dust of years, she pulled it out. Inside, nestled amongst yellowed sketchbooks and dried-up ink sticks, was a small framed painting. It depicted a tranquil scene, a single willow tree leaning over a still pond, its reflection rendered in delicate, confident strokes. She had painted it when she was 19, just before she met Gao Wei, before her world narrowed to the four walls of domesticity. A wave of emotion, sharp and unexpectedly potent, pricked at her eyes. She remembered the feel of the brush, the thrill of capturing beauty, the quiet ambition that had once burned within her. A young woman with bright, hopeful eyes stared back at her from a faded photograph tucked into the frame. Meihua quickly closed the box, pushing it back into its shadowed corner as if it contained a dangerous secret. The weekend arrived with the boisterous energy of her grandson, Xiao Bao, a 5-year-old whirlwind. Gao Ming and his wife Ling Ling bustled in, depositing bags and instructions before rushing off to their important lives. Meihua's apartment, usually a haven of quiet order, was transformed into a landscape of scattered toys and high-pitched demands. She cooked, she cleaned, she played, her own fatigue a dull ache beneath the surface of her forced cheerfulness. It happened on Saturday afternoon. Meihua was in the kitchen, meticulously preparing the Hong Shao roux, the rich aroma filling the small space. Xiao Bao, chasing an imaginary monster, careened into the living room. There was a sickening crash. Meihua rushed out, her heart lurching. Her treasured willow painting lay on the floor, the glass shattered, a jagged tear marring the delicate paper. Xiao Bao, startled, began to wail. Ling Ling, who had just returned to pick up a forgotten file, rushed to comfort him. "Oh, my baby, are you okay? Don't cry, it's all right." Gao Ming, arriving with her, surveyed the scene. "Aya Ma, you're painting. Xiao Bao, you need to be more careful." He gave his son a cursory pat. Then, turning to Meihua, he said with an easy smile, "Don't worry about it, Ma. It's just an old thing. We can buy you a nice new print from one of those art shops in Guanqian Street." Mei Hua stood frozen. An old thing. The words, so casually uttered, landed like blows. It wasn't just a painting. It was a piece of her soul, a testament to a life unlived. She looked at her son, at his well-meaning, uncomprehending face, and a profound sense of desolation washed over her. She said nothing, merely stooped to pick up the larger shards of glass, her hands trembling slightly. No one noticed. In the days that followed, a subtle shift occurred within Li Meihua. The small, everyday instances of being overlooked, of her needs being relegated to afterthoughts, began to accumulate with a new, sharper weight. Gao Wei remained engrossed in his bonsai, occasionally remarking that the tea wasn't as hot as usual, or that his favourite pickles were running low. Gao Ming called, his voice full of his own concerns. A minor issue at work, Xiao Bao's latest developmental milestone, casually adding a request for her to make a batch of zongzi for the upcoming Dragon Boat Festival. "It's not that much work, Ma, and yours are the best." Each word, once absorbed with a sigh of maternal duty, now pricked at her. She saw herself as if from a distance, a perpetually available resource, an endlessly patient fixture in their lives, her own desires and feelings as invisible as the air they breathed. The damaged painting, now hidden away in the box, became a symbol of this invisibility, this casual disregard. One afternoon, seeking respite from the oppressive silence of her apartment, Mei Hua found herself wandering through the shaded paths of the humble administrator's garden. It wasn't far, but she rarely visited, always too busy. Today, the ancient trees and tranquil ponds offered a balm to her frayed spirit. In a quiet pavilion overlooking a lotus pond, she saw a small group of seniors, their heads bent in concentration over rice paper, brushes moving with practiced grace. The scent of fresh ink, a fragrance she hadn't consciously registered in decades, wafted towards her, unlocking a cascade of dormant memories. She lingered, drawn by an invisible thread. An elderly man with kind eyes and ink-stained fingers looked up and smiled. "Interested in the brush, little sister?" he asked, his voice gentle. Mei Hua felt a blush creep up her neck. "Oh, no, I used to, a long time ago." "The brush never forgets a willing hand," he said, his smile widening. "I am Chen Kang. We have a small informal class here and at the community centre on Wednesdays. No pressure, just friends sharing a love for the ink." He gestured to an empty stool. "Why not sit for a while?" Chen Lao Shi, as she would come to call him, was a retired art teacher, his passion for traditional painting infectious. Mei Hua stayed that afternoon, not painting, but watching, listening, the long dormant artist within her stirring with a hesitant pulse. The encounter with Chen Lao Shi planted a seed. For days, Mei Hua wrestled with herself. The idea of picking up a brush again felt both exhilarating and terrifyingly self-indulgent. Who was she at 62 to suddenly pursue a forgotten hobby? What would Gao Wei say? What would Ming think? But the image of the shattered willow painting and Gao Ming's dismissive words kept replaying in her mind. An old thing. Perhaps she too had become an old thing, easily discarded. One Tuesday, when Gao Wei was out for his weekly chess game with old colleagues, Mei Hua found herself standing before a small art supply shop near the community centre. Her heart hammered against her ribs. With a surge of impulsiveness that surprised even herself, she went in and bought a small, inexpensive set of brushes, a bottle of ink and a pad of rice paper. The purchase felt clandestine, illicit almost. Back in the solitude of her apartment, she spread the paper on the kitchen table, her hands trembling as she uncapped the ink. The first strokes were clumsy, hesitant. The brush felt alien in her hand. Frustration welled up. This was foolish. She was too old, too out of practice. But then, as she persisted, a faint echo of the old joy returned. The way the ink bled onto the paper, the subtle gradations of black and grey, the challenge of controlling the water and the brush, it was like reacquainting herself with a long-lost friend. This became her secret. When Gao Wei was napping or out, she would paint. Simple things at first, bamboo stalks, a single orchid, a clumsy attempt at a goldfish. The results were often disappointing, but the act itself, the quiet concentration, the feeling of creating something, however imperfect, was a balm to her spirit. It was a space that was entirely her own, untouched by duty or expectation. Slowly, cautiously, Mei Hua began to attend Chen Laoxi's informal classes at the community center on Wednesday afternoons. The other students, mostly retirees like herself, were welcoming. They shared tips, admired each other's efforts, and offered gentle critiques. For the first time in years, Mei Hua felt a sense of camaraderie outside her family, a connection based on shared interest rather than obligation. These new commitments, however small, inevitably began to ripple through her established routines. One Wednesday, Gao Wei returned home to find a simple dinner of noodles and stir-fried vegetables instead of his usual multi-course meal. "No soup today?" he asked, a hint of surprise in his voice. "I had an appointment this afternoon, Lao Gao," Mei Hua replied, her voice carefully neutral. "Didn't have much time." He grunted, but didn't press further. The real test came with Gao Ming. He called on a Tuesday, asking if she could babysit Xiao Bao the next day, as Ling Ling had an unexpected work commitment. "Tomorrow is Wednesday, eh, Ming?" Mei Hua said, her heart fluttering. "I have my class then." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Class? What class, Ma? Is it important?" "It's important to me," she said, surprised at her own firmness. She didn't elaborate. Gao Ming sounded put out. "Oh, well, okay. I guess I'll have to figure something else out." The unspoken accusation, what could be more important than your grandson, hung in the air. Her daughter Gao Jing, who lived and worked in Shanghai, called for her weekly check-in. Mei Hua, feeling a small surge of courage, mentioned her painting. "That's nice, Ma," Gao Jing said, her voice distracted. "Good for you to have a hobby. Listen, about my promotion." The conversation quickly moved on, leaving Mei Hua feeling a familiar pang of insignificance, though it was less sharp this time. Her art was for her, she reminded herself, not for their approval. One Sunday, the entire Gao clan, including Gao Wei's sister and her family, gathered at Mei Hua's apartment for an early Dragon Boat Festival meal. Amidst the clatter of mahjong tiles and the boisterous chatter, Gao Ming began outlining plans for a family trip to Huangshan in the autumn. "And Ma, you'll come, of course. You can look after Xiao Bao, while Ling Ling and I do some of the more strenuous hikes." Mei Hua took a slow sip of tea. The old Li Mei Hua would have nodded, already mentally planning menus and packing lists. The new Li Mei Hua, the one who spent Wednesday afternoons with ink and paper, hesitated. "Ming," she said, her voice quieter than the surrounding hubbub, but clear. "That sounds lovely. But my art class has a small exhibition planned for October. I've been asked to submit something. I might not be able to get away for that long." A stunned silence fell over the immediate vicinity of the table. Gao Ming stared at her, incredulous. "An art exhibition? Ma, what are you talking about? It's a family trip." "I understand, dear," Mei Hua said, her gaze steady, "but this is also important to me." Gao Wei's sister raised an eyebrow. Gao Wei himself looked mildly bewildered, as if his wife had suddenly started speaking a foreign language. Ling Ling tried to smooth things over. "Of course, Ai, we understand. We can plan around it." But Gao Ming's irritation was palpable. The rest of the meal was strained. Mei Hua felt a tremor of fear, but also a surprising, resilient core of resolve. She had spoken her truth, however small. Chen Laoxi had been gently encouraging Mei Hua for weeks. "Your bamboo has real spirit, Mei Hua," he'd said, peering at one of her recent efforts. "And your lotus flowers, they have a quiet strength. The community center is hosting a small exhibition for local amateur artists next month. You should submit something." Mei Hua had demurred, self-doubt a persistent shadow. Her work was clumsy, derivative. Who would want to see it? But Chen Laoxi, with his patient smile, persisted. "It's not about being a master, Mei Hua. It's about sharing your heart." Finally, she agreed. The thought of her work, however humble, being displayed publicly filled her with a mixture of terror and a shy, unfamiliar pride. She chose to paint a single lotus flower, its stem rising strong from murky water, its petals unfurling in shades of delicate pink and white. She poured all her rediscovered passion, all her quiet defiance, into each stroke. When she finally showed it to Chen Laoxi, he simply nodded, a deep understanding in his eyes. "This one," he said, "this one has your soul in it." The acceptance of her piece into the Autumn Hues exhibition felt like a personal triumph, a validation she hadn't realized she craved. The opening was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon. Mei Hua found herself looking forward to it with an almost girlish excitement. She even bought a new qipao-style blouse in a soft lavender, a colour she hadn't worn in years. The Saturday morning of the exhibition dawned bright and clear. Mei Hua was carefully ironing her new blouse when the phone rang. It was Gao Ming, his voice tight with panic. "Ma, you have to come over right now." Ling Ling woke up with a terrible fever. She can barely lift her head. "I don't know what to do with Xiao Bao, and I have a mountain of work to catch up on from home today. Please, Ma, I need you." Mei Hua's heart sank. The familiar tug-of-war began inside her. Ling Ling was ill. Xiao Bao needed care. Her family needed her. It was her duty. "The exhibition, Ming," she began, her voice weak. "Ma, that little art thing," he interrupted, his exasperation evident. "It can wait, can't it? This is family. Ling Ling is really sick. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't an emergency." An emergency? Was it truly? Or was it another instance of her being the default solution, her own commitments, her own joys, always secondary? She pictured her lotus painting waiting to be seen. She thought of Chen Laoxi's encouraging smile, the quiet camaraderie of her fellow artists. She remembered the sting of just an old thing. A lifetime of conditioning screamed at her to drop everything, to rush to her son's side. But another voice, newer, quieter, yet surprisingly firm, whispered, "What about you, Mei Hua? What about your moment?" She took a deep breath. The silence stretched. Gao Ming prompted, "Ma, are you coming?" "Ah Ming," she said, her voice trembling slightly but holding steady. "I am so sorry Ling Ling is unwell. I hope she feels better soon. But the exhibition opens this afternoon. I have to be there. I made a commitment." A shocked silence. Then, "You have to be there. More than you have to help your own family." "Ma, I don't understand." "I understand this is difficult for you, Ming," Mei Hua continued, clutching the phone so tightly her knuckles were white. "Perhaps you could take the day off work to look after Ling Ling and Xiao Bao, or maybe ask your sister-in-law if she could help for a few hours. I will call later to see how Ling Ling is doing." "So you're not coming?" he said, his voice flat, laced with disbelief and resentment. "I cannot come this afternoon, Ming. I am truly sorry." Each word was an effort, a victory. He hung up without another word. Mei Hua slowly lowered the phone, her body shaking. She had done it. She had chosen herself. The cost, she knew, might be high, but as she looked at the lavender blouse ready to be worn, a fragile sense of peace began to settle over her. The community centre hall was modestly decorated with red paper lanterns and banners proclaiming autumn hues. The air smelled of old wood, floor polish, and the faint, exciting scent of fresh paint and paper. Mei Hua, wearing her lavender blouse, felt a nervous flutter in her stomach, but also a quiet dignity. She found her painting easily. The lotus, displayed on a simple easel, seemed to glow softly under the fluorescent lights. It wasn't the grandest piece, nor the most technically perfect, but to her it was beautiful. It was hers. Chen Laoxi greeted her with a warm smile. "It looks wonderful, Mei Hua. You should be very proud." She chatted with a few of the other artists, fellow retirees who understood the quiet joy of this late-blooming creativity. She sipped watery orange squash from a paper cup and nibbled on a dry biscuit, feeling a sense of belonging she hadn't experienced in a long, long time. An hour into the opening, Gao Wei appeared at the doorway, looking slightly lost and out of place in his usual grey jacket. Mei Hua's heart gave a little jump. He shuffled over to her painting, peered at it closely for a long moment, his brow furrowed. Then he turned to her. "Not bad," he said, his voice gruff. "The water, it looks wet." Coming from Gao Wei, it was practically a sonnet. He then wandered off to inspect a calligraphy scroll, but he had come. That was something. Later, her phone buzzed. A text from Gao Jing. "Heard about your exhibition from Dad, Ma. So proud of you. Wish I could be there. Send pics." A small, genuine warmth spread through Mei Hua. Gao Ming did not appear. As the afternoon wore on, Mei Hua found herself glancing at the door less and less. His absence was a dull ache. Yes, but it no longer had the power to extinguish the small, steady flame of her own quiet triumph. Her worth, she was beginning to understand, was not solely reflected